Have you ever stopped to question who exactly this self is that thinks your thoughts? Who is this presence that seems to inhabit your mind and comment on every action, every decision, every mistake, and every success throughout the day? At first glance, this question may sound strange, almost uncomfortable, as if touching on this subject were a sign of confusion. However, what almost no one realizes is that this self that seeks answers may be precisely the greatest impediment to seeing the truth. Jiddu Krishnamurti said that the moment the observer realizes that he himself is being observed, understanding is born. This seemingly simple phrase carries a depth capable of completely altering how you perceive yourself in reality. It's not a mental trick or a pretty idea to impress, but a radical change of perspective, something that adds nothing new, only reveals what has always been present but never clearly seen. At some point in life, we all feel the weight of excessive self-awareness, that persistent feeling of being judged all the time, not by others, but by ourselves. You act, speak, decide, and soon the inner voice emerges, evaluating everything. This was right, that was wrong, you should have done it differently. This voice functions like a sports commentator describing a game he himself invented. The curious thing is that we learn to believe that we are this voice. But what if we aren't? What if this incessant flow of comments is just background noise? What if your true self is precisely what listens in silence, attentive, present, but without making judgments? What would happen if, instead of trying to silence this voice, you started to observe who is listening? This journey doesn't lead to a new place, but to a profound recognition. What you seek is already what you are. The consciousness that tries to understand the world is the same consciousness that constructs the experience of the world. When this is perceived, something awakens within us. Something that has always been there, just waiting for the moment to be recognized. A common mistake for those beginning a spiritual journey is confusing the voice that comments on everything with the observer. This confusion is so frequent that even experienced meditation practitioners spend years trapped in it. It's like trying to silence a crowd shouting for silence. The more you try, the more noise arises. This inner commentator takes many forms. Sometimes it's the narrator who turns your day into a story. Other times, it's the harsh critic who blames and judges every step. At certain moments, it becomes an encourager who extols your achievements. Deep down, they all do the same thing, try to define who you are. This narrator seems distant from daily life, as if it were a wise entity, observing everything from above. But this is just an act. It's the ego disguised as an observer. Imagine yourself in a coffee shop, conversations all around, the sound of cups, laughter nearby. If you focus only on these noises, you even miss the taste of the coffee. The inner commentator works like that, like a constant noise that you've mistaken for your essence. These voices don't actually observe, they only react. The true observer is not noisy. He doesn't think, doesn't judge, doesn't comment. He simply perceives. He sees the movement of the mind without mingling with it, not out of indifference, but because he understands that none of these voices define who you are. When you understand that the observer is the observed, the separation disappears, and the commentator reveals his nature, a product of the mind and personal history. This commentator is fueled by memories, traumas, desires, insecurities, culture, and experiences accumulated since childhood. That's why he is unstable. One day he calls you a failure, the next a genius, and yet you believe him. It's difficult to realize that this voice isn't you because it sounds intimate, knows your deepest pains, speaks like someone very close, but intimacy is not identity. The fact that something seems familiar doesn't make it true. The revelation begins when you experience that brief silence between one thought and another. Sometimes it happens in the middle of a breath, when everything pauses for an instant. At that moment, there are no comments, only presence. That is the observer. He witnesses the storm without getting wet, sees fear without running away, perceives love without clinging, and embraces sadness without rejecting it. It is in this space that transformation happens. When you understand that the commentator is not you, the struggle against it simply ceases. And curiously, when the struggle ends, the voice also quiets down. In silence, you find yourself. Many believe that the observer is a refuge separate from life. But it is not a place. It is the space where everything happens. Once recognized, it requires no effort. Alan Watts said that you don't need to force yourself to be who you are, because you already are. This perception is liberating and at the same time disconcerting. This reveals that the most essential part of you has no voice, opinion, or judgment. It simply observes, like the sky that receives all the clouds without ever becoming any of them. This silence is not empty. It is alive, full of presence, present in every emotion, thought, and experience that arises. This observer is here now as you listen to these words. Note that it doesn't think about what is being said. It perceives the thoughts reacting. Many give up at this point because the mind, addicted to control, wants to understand, name, explain. But the observer escapes words not because it is complex, but because it is too simple. That is why spiritual masters describe it in different ways. Some call it God, others emptiness, soul, or pure consciousness. Krishnamurti spoke of attention without choice. The Upanishads called it Atman. In Buddhism, it is Rigpa. Marcus Aurelius taught to observe thoughts with clarity. The names change, but the experience is the same. A consciousness that sees everything without being confused by anything. The silence that perceives movement remains, while everything else comes and goes. Remember moments when you were mesmerized by the sea, by fire, or by music, forgetting yourself for an instant. That was the observer revealing itself, not as something separate, but as you without layers. That is why it is universal. The same observer who sees your thoughts now saw the thoughts of Buddha, of a silent monk, of a child playing, or of someone lost in reverie. Experiences change, but the space that observes is the same. As you approach this silence, you realize that name, history, desires, and fears are fleeting forms. The mind screams, the observer listens. The mind analyzes, the observer sees. You don't need to become the observer. Just recognize when you get lost in the internal commentary and gently return to the silence that has always been present. That which you have always sought, peace, freedom, meaning, was never outside. It was in the interval between thoughts, in the space between words, in the invisible silence between you and the world. Something in you remains intact since childhood. The body changes, ideas change, but the feeling of existence remains the same. This presence does not belong to time. Krishnamurti said that when the separation between the one who sees and what is seen disappears, duality dissolves. There is no longer subject and object, only consciousness recognizing itself. Alan Watts compared this to a jazz improvisation. There is no central control, only fluidity. All traditions point to the same invitation, to recognize the eternal amidst the ephemeral. When this is seen, the relationship with life changes, and fear, attachment, and grief lose their power. Much suffering arises from the attempt to hold on to what is impermanent. The observer does not try to retain anything. He sees, lets go, and remains. This is true freedom. The observer is not an individual possession. It is the same in everyone. When this is recognized, the feeling of separation begins to crumble. The same silence that observes you observes the other. It is not a matter of belief, but of direct perception. To live from this silence is not to adopt a concept, but a living practice. Thoughts keep arising, but you're not swept away by them. a profound understanding of human suffering and a natural compassion emerge. As Rumi said, beyond right and wrong there is a field. It is in this space that everything changes. The world seems the same, but you never see it the same way again. If you've made it this far, thank you for making space for self-discovery. Before the algorithm separates us, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment about the moment that touched you the most, and continue this inner odyssey in the next video.